It's a joy to step up in there and inhabit that space and be unapologetically evil.
So I was gone at that point.
In Hollywood, loyalty is shaky. Your best friend today could flip into your biggest rival tomorrow. That's exactly what went down between Samuel L. Jackson and Quentin Tarantino. For years, they looked unstoppable together, building a partnership that gifted fans some of the most legendary movie moments of all time. Think about it. Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Django Unchained. Tarantino's bold writing paired with Jackson's fiery delivery was a combo no one could touch. Tarantino's scripts pushed Jackson into career-defining roles, while Jackson brought those lines to life with unmatched swagger.
Quentin and I have conversations about what I say, and I don't.
Their connection seemed locked in stone, powered by respect and a fearless love for storytelling. But behind the red carpets and big screen magic, the cracks were already forming. Word is, they clashed over creative choices, battled with oversized egos, and had totally different visions of what stories should be told. That kind of tension doesn't just fade, it builds until it blows up, and eventually, the friendship was torched for good. Now at 76, Samuel L. Jackson isn't holding back anymore. He's opening up about what went down, how it broke their bond, and why some Hollywood friendships are doomed to crash under the weight of pride and ambition. According to Jackson, one of the biggest sparks of this feud was Tarantino's habit of always typecasting him, and Jackson had enough.
So when I got the script from Quentin, he just called me, told me he wrote a Western, he wanted me to read Steven.
See, typecasting in Hollywood is tricky. Some actors love it. It keeps them working and recognizable. But for someone as versatile and sharp as Jackson, it felt like being trapped in a cage. And when that cage is built by a friend you trusted most, that's not just frustrating, it's personal. Jackson has admitted plenty of times that Tarantino handed him career-defining roles. Jules Winfield in Pulp Fiction made him a star overnight, and his performances in Jackie Brown and Django Unchained proved he could command any scene with explosive energy. But the very roles that built his legacy also became the chain he was fighting to break free from. And that's where the resentment really started to burn. But as Samuel L. Jackson later admitted, the steady stream of similar roles started to wear him down. In one interview, he flat out said, "I love Quentin. But after a while, I realized he was only seeing me one way, as if I could only ever be the loud, intense guy with a gun and a monologue. That's not all I am." And that wasn't just ego talking. Jackson has always valued his range. Outside of Tarantino's bubble, he's been everything from the slick Nick Fury in Marvel's mega franchise to the heartfelt father in Coach Carter. For him, acting is about shape-shifting, about showing the world he can do it all. Being boxed in, even by a director he once admired deeply, started to feel like a creative slap in the face. Critics and film historians backed him up too. One critic said, "Tarantino has a brilliant ear for dialogue, but he leans too hard on the same archetypes."
I spent years and years and years in theater, helped me a lot to embrace what Quentin does.
And honestly, Jackson felt that more than anyone. Year after year, it was like Tarantino couldn't resist casting him as the mouthpiece for his own edgy worldview, no matter how many times Jackson proved he could break free. Insiders in Hollywood noticed it too. One industry voice reportedly said, "Sam could do Shakespeare. He could crush comedy. He could rip your heart apart with drama." But Quentin kept forcing him back into that same tough guy energy, the same rhythm. Even colleagues whispered about how limiting it felt. And behind the curtain, crew members picked up on Jackson's quiet frustration. Sure, he stayed professional, he always does. But there were moments when his energy told another story. Restlessness, irritation, like he was silently fighting a battle that nobody else could see. That endless cycle of playing roles that looked and sounded too much alike eventually wore him down, leaving him creatively drained and desperate for a real challenge. And in Hollywood, where your image can make or break you, breaking free from a cycle like that always comes with a heavy price. Every time Jackson teamed up with Tarantino, the audience expected that same version of him. Not the actor who could shock you with something brand new. And for someone like Jackson, that got exhausting fast. The truth, the roles weren't bad at all. They were iconic, but they were also boxed in, too narrow, too predictable. Jackson wanted to step into roles that looked nothing like his last. He wanted to push himself, to take on challenges that scared him, roles that stretched him in uncomfortable ways. But Tarantino's scripts, no matter how stylish, kept locking him into one lane. The fierce, sharp-tongued powerhouse who stole every scene with brute charisma.
Now you want me to be the most hated Negro in cinematic history? He's like, oh yeah.
During an interview with Flicks News, Jackson spoke openly about the tension. He made it clear he wasn't ungrateful for the opportunities Tarantino gave him, but he didn't want the world thinking that's all he could deliver. That kind of label felt more like a cage than a compliment. Because here's the ugly truth. Typecasting is like a slow death for an actor. It chips away at your creativity, it kills the hunger to grow, and it leaves you fighting not to disappear in an industry obsessed with the next fresh face. Jackson's honesty struck a nerve across Hollywood, because he wasn't just speaking for himself, he was voicing a reality that many actors suffer in silence. Even Tarantino's biggest fans have admitted he has a habit of pigeonholing his stars, shaping them to fit his vision, not their potential. And for Jackson, that wasn't just professional frustration. It felt like betrayal wrapped in opportunity. To be boxed in by a stranger is one thing, but to be boxed in by a friend you trusted, that cut way deeper. Over time, that frustration started bleeding into their friendship. The tension wasn't hidden anymore. It became part of their dynamic. And in Hollywood, where reinvention is survival, Jackson knew fighting typecasting wasn't just about ego. It was about protecting his craft, his legacy, and his dignity as one of the greatest to ever do it. This also meant Jackson's relationship with Tarantino grew tense and complicated because behind the scenes, Quentin's control was ironclad.
Okay, or he'll say, no, leave it the way I wrote it. And that's generally what happens.
Few directors in Hollywood are known for obsessing over every single word like Tarantino. His scripts are built like symphonies, precise, rhythmic, stylish, instantly recognizable. But that same brilliance also made him one of the toughest directors to work with, especially for actors who live for freedom and spontaneity. And nobody felt that tug of war more than Samuel L. Jackson.
Well, Quentin's always a joy. He has a set that's full of life.
On one hand, he's praised Tarantino as a genius, calling him a writer who understands rhythm the way a musician does. Jackson has admitted that the man's words leap off the page like fire, but at the same time, he's confessed that working under Tarantino's rule could be draining. The issue, Quentin's refusal to loosen his grip on dialogue, even for a second. Jackson once revealed, it's always a back and forth before he'll let me change a line. Sometimes I'll say, look, this will sound better if I say it this way, and Quentin will dig his heels in. He doesn't like to give up control easily.
Quentin doesn't let us improvise. What the fuck's going on? But then I realized, oh shit, that's Daisy. She kind of.
And here's the thing, this wasn't about disrespect. For Jackson, improvisation was never about trying to overshadow Tarantino's talent. It was about elevating it. He believed that an actor's lived experience, especially his own unique cadence and delivery, could breathe raw energy into a line that sometimes looked stiff on paper. Jackson's timing, his cultural nuance, the way he could flip a line into something unforgettable. That's part of what made Tarantino's dialogue legendary. But Jackson often felt Tarantino wasn't quick to admit just how much those tweaks mattered. Insiders have backed him up too. One crew member from Django Unchained reportedly said Jackson would throw out variations that had the whole set laughing or even stunned, but Quentin would shut it down, insisting it had to stay word for word. Witnesses said you could literally see Jackson biting his tongue like he wanted to scream, "Trust me on this." For an actor who thrives on energy and spontaneity, being chained to the page felt suffocating. Now at 76, Jackson looks back with wisdom, but the sting is still there. He's blunt. Quentin wants his words said exactly as written. But sometimes an actor knows what feels alive in the moment. And Jackson, he wasn't afraid to fight for that freedom, even if it meant clashing with the director who gave him some of his greatest roles. When you work with Tarantino, suggestions basically didn't exist. It was always a fight. Jackson himself called it a battle, and that battle became the trademark of their collaborations. But here's the twist. Tarantino trusted Jackson more than almost anyone in Hollywood. He literally wrote roles with him in mind, once calling him the voice of my movies. He leaned on Jackson to give his stories weight and authority. Yet, The second Jackson tried to bend the script, Tarantino's confidence disappeared. And that's where the real fracture began. For Jackson, those improvisations weren't just flashy add-ons. They were weapons, ways to make his characters feel human, layered, unforgettable. But Tarantino's refusal to loosen control left Jackson feeling suffocated, like the magic he brought to the table was being stifled. And when you're an actor who spent decades proving your individuality in an industry that loves to confine you, that kind of tug of war doesn't just annoy you, it breaks you.
Hateful Eight.
Oh, Quentin Tarantino.
Hanging out with Quentin, yeah, man.
I mean, this is the one I'm talking.
Jackson eventually admitted that what hurt most wasn't just the arguments, it was Tarantino's shadow over his career. He once said flat out, "I hate it when I'm referred to as that guy that starred in Tarantino's movie." Imagine building a massive career and people still define you by someone else's name. For years, every article, every award season montage, every magazine profile circled right back to the same three movies: Pulp Fiction, Jackie Brown, Django Unchained. Sure, those performances were electric. Jules Winfield became a pop culture icon. Ordell Robbie was unforgettable. Steven in Django was chilling to the core. Jackson delivered fire every single time. But to him, that recognition came with chains. Because while Tarantino's films got all the spotlight, so many of Jackson's other career-defining roles were ignored. Where were the conversations about A Time to Kill? Where was the respect for Coach Carter? What about The Banker? These films showed sides of him that had nothing to do with Tarantino's universe. But critics and fans kept dragging him right back into Quentin's orbit like he couldn't shine without him. It was the ultimate paradox. Jackson was grateful for the iconic characters Tarantino handed him, but he was furious that people acted like those were the only roles that defined his legacy. And that public obsession, always circling back to Tarantino, became a ghost haunting his career, a shadow he could never quite shake off, no matter how much range he displayed elsewhere. This was never just about ego, it was about recognition. Samuel L. Jackson had spent decades proving his versatility, playing roles filled with humor, heartbreak, and restraint. Yet time and time again, the media reduced him to one thing: Tarantino's fire-breathing archetype. The sharp tongue, the commanding presence, the man with a monologue ready to explode.
I get a whole new group of people, asking me about quarter pounder of cheese and friends. Say what again?
Friends and colleagues saw how the weight of that label started eating at him. They remembered late-night conversations where Jackson questioned why critics ignored the emotional depth he showed outside Tarantino's world. It was like no matter what he did, people only wanted to talk about Jules from Pulp Fiction or Steven from Django. And that constant association didn't just frustrate Jackson, it strained his friendship with Tarantino too. What Quentin might have seen as a compliment, proof that together they created cinematic lightning, Jackson felt as a cage. To him, it was as if the world was saying his best self only existed through Quentin's scripts. And for a man who built his career on being self-made, resilient, and fiercely independent, that idea was infuriating. Industry insiders pointed out that this was classic Hollywood. It's easier for critics to simplify than to recognize complexity. So instead of celebrating Jackson's full body of work, they branded him Tarantino's Muse. But that branding came with a price. Jackson's hard-earned success began to feel like it belonged to someone else's pen, someone else's vision. Looking back, Jackson admitted with irritation that the shadow of those collaborations nearly tainted his career. Yes, he was grateful for the iconic roles, but he hated how they overshadowed decades of blood, sweat, and unforgettable performances outside of Tarantino's orbit. Every time he took a role outside Quentin's universe, it wasn't just acting anymore. It was a battle to prove he was more than one director's creation. And that battle left scars. Jackson and Tarantino undeniably had a chemistry that gave the world some of the most unforgettable cinema ever made. But the public's obsession with tying his greatness to Quentin alone created a quiet bitterness that never faded. And Jackson, looking back now, doesn't hold back. He believes Tarantino is the reason why the world refused to see the full Samuel L. Jackson. Living under that narrative turned every new collaboration into a reminder of how hard it was to break free from someone else's shadow. Even after a lifetime of proving he could carry his own light, Samuel L. Jackson said the endless comparisons weren't just irritating, they were suffocating. What once felt like a golden partnership slowly twisted into a source of resentment. Jackson knew his legacy was powerful, but the fear lingered. Would people always see him as just the actor who thrived under Tarantino's pen? That thought ate at him. And when his own productions started being dismissed as Tarantino-style imitations, it became the boiling point of their feud.
When I have a movie that's opening, I know it's going to make at least $1,000 that weekend because I buy $1,000 worth of tickets.
By 2020, Jackson had stepped into brand new territory with Enslaved, a documentary series uncovering the raw truths of the transatlantic slave trade. Through shipwreck explorations, survivor accounts, and deep historical research, Jackson wasn't just producing content, he was carrying out a mission. This was bigger than box office numbers. This was about reclaiming erased history and using his influence for something that actually mattered. But instead of the praise he deserved, Enslaved got tangled in controversy. Critics and commentators started making unnecessary comparisons, claiming his work carried shades of Tarantino's storytelling. Some even dared to accuse him of imitating Django Unchained. That accusation hit Jackson hard, not just because it was untrue, but because it belittled a deeply personal, fact-driven project by tying it to Hollywood fantasy. The implication was insulting. Even when Jackson created something rooted in truth and history, people still insisted on viewing it through the lens of Tarantino. And that was the moment Jackson realized just how heavy Quentin's shadow really was. Yes, Jackson has always acknowledged that Tarantino handed him iconic roles, but being permanently chained to one filmmaker's name, that was draining, humiliating even. Enslaved should have stood on its own as a groundbreaking cultural project.
I might pass him before that because I got a little film coming out called The Incredibles like in 2 weeks.
Oh, right.
But instead, it was clouded by whispers that he could never escape Tarantino's orbit. For Jackson, this wasn't just about movies anymore, it was about dignity. A project born from history, culture, and truth was being reduced to fan chatter about Tarantino's influence. And in that moment, Jackson knew their partnership wasn't just strained, it was poisoned beyond repair. Tarantino's shadow had followed him everywhere, and Jackson was done letting it define his light. To Samuel L. Jackson, it felt like the industry and the audience were stripping him of ownership over his own vision. People close to him pushed back, reminding critics that Enslaved was nothing like Tarantino's pulp-driven fantasies. Where Tarantino leaned on stylized violence and provocative spectacle, Jackson's series was grounded in history, fact, and his own personal legacy. But no matter how many voices defended him, the comparisons wouldn't stop. And for a man as fiercely independent as Jackson, that wasn't just criticism, it was a slap in the face. This was the very box he'd been fighting against his whole career, the cage he thought he had already broken. This became the real turning point. Jackson was already tired of being typecast, already worn down by the constant label of Tarantino's muse. But now he was being accused of imitation, even in his most personal project. That wasn't just unfair, it was downright insulting. He had poured his voice, his history, his heritage into Enslaved. Yet instead of being honored for it, critics reduced it to a faint echo of Tarantino's imagination.
So I was gone at that point.
Looking back, Jackson admits this moment hardened the wall between him and Quentin. What should have been a milestone in independent storytelling instead became proof that Tarantino's shadow still lingered over his career. And the frustration, it never really went away. But if anything, it also made Jackson more determined. He doubled down on his mission to prove that his creative identity belonged to him and him alone. Enslaved wasn't about Tarantino, it was about truth, about history, and about finally carving out space where his artistry couldn't be mistaken for someone else's. And for those still doubting the feud, look no further than what came after The Hateful Eight. For decades, Tarantino had written Samuel L. Jackson into the heart of his movies. But when Once Upon a Time in Hollywood hit theaters in 2019, fans were shocked. No Jackson, no cameo, no scene-stealing role. For the first time in their long partnership, Quentin pressed ahead without him, and the silence spoke louder than words. The bond that once looked unshakable had fractured for good. Jackson's fight for recognition collided with Tarantino's unyielding grip on his vision, leaving behind a feud that reshaped both of their legacies. And that's the scandalous truth behind the Samuel L. Jackson, Quentin Tarantino fallout. What do you think? Was Jackson right to feel boxed in, or was Tarantino simply protecting his art? Drop your thoughts in the comments, hit like, share this story, and don't forget to subscribe for more Hollywood deep dives. See you on the next one.